on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Crusade on your TV, online and on your wireless. Today we will be discussing Justin Welby's £100 million fund to, quote, address past wrongs of slavery, Cardinal Pell's righteous fury at the Vatican's theological direction, and discussing your faith on social media. But first, here's the news with Ray Addison.
Good afternoon, it's 3 o'clock. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. A 7-year-old girl remains in a stable but life-threatening condition after a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot outside a funeral in Euston. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl required hospital treatment, with one of the women suffering life-changing injuries. Superintendent Jack Rowlands says the suspects used a shotgun.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
At least 68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The search for the remaining 4 passengers has been halted until Monday. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay wrote to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. He wants minimum service levels to be set in law. It comes as anti-strike legislation is due to be debated by MPs tomorrow. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. Staying with health, and Sir Keir Starmer is calling for an overhaul of the NHS, saying it must reform or it will die. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he says a future Labour government would turn GPs into direct NHS employees rather than allowing them to run their own practices. He's also announced plans to allow some patients, such as those with back pain, to self-refer themselves to specialists.
We'll double the number of medical students using money from abolishing the non-dom status for the super rich. But also we need to look at the way GPs operate and see whether we can't make changes there. Things which will actually preserve the NHS going forward. The moment what the government's doing is really just presiding over managed decline, and that I will not accept. Of course there will be, challenges whenever you reform something, but frankly, if you don't reform the NHS, then I fear it will die.
The Prime Minister is asking government ministers to help persuade global allies to give more support to Ukraine and help break the stalemate with Russia. It comes after Rishi Sunak announced the UK would be sending 14 tanks to Kyiv. With the first anniversary of the war approaching, Mr Sunak is stressing the need for an international strategy. Former Major General Chip Chapman was head of counter-terrorism at the MOD. He told us Russia isn't backing down.
So it's really this shift in the red lines, which will probably lead to other countries in the next 2 weeks also giving armour to the Ukrainians, which gives them this idea of a winning faster strategy in 2023. Of course, the enemy on the other side gets a vote in that, and it looks like the Russians are going to mobilise another 500,000 men this year on top of the 300,000 they mobilised in October. So there's a lot of hard fighting to come yet.
Well, over the last 24 hours or so, Russia launched a major missile attack on Ukraine, striking vital energy facilities across the country and destroying an apartment building. Officials say at least 21 people have been killed, 40 still unaccounted for. Ukrainian authorities say the coming days will be difficult, with threats to the supply of electricity, water and heating during the height of winter. Well, the UK is facing more than 100 flood warnings, with cold and wet conditions set to continue well into next week. The Environment Agency had issued 192 flood alerts, whilst yellow warnings for ice are in place for much of Scotland and the northwest and northeast of England. The Met Office is also warning that a few centimetres of snow are likely at low levels. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Calvin.
Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. Here's what's coming up this afternoon. The Archbishop of Canterbury has defended the establishment of a £100 million fund to, quote, address past wrongs of slavery during a time of financial crisis among parishes. But parishioners and clergy criticised the Archbishop for suddenly having around £100 million behind the back of the sofa when vicars are losing their jobs and parishes are being merged. And then, shortly before he died on Tuesday, Cardinal Pell wrote an article for The Spectator in which he denounced the Vatican's plans for its forthcoming synod on synodality as a toxic nightmare. I'll be asking, should more senior figures in the church speak their minds and question authority? And of course, we'll be discussing whether Harry and Meghan will be invited to the King's coronation this May. We have to, don't we? Some royal insiders believe there's a chance of peace talks, but both sides need to hold their hands up and admit they got a lot wrong. And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or by tweeting @gbnews. The Archbishop of Canterbury has once again apologised for the Church's, quote, historic links to transatlantic chattel slavery. And the Church of England has set aside £100 million in reparations for, quote, communities impacted by slavery. If the Church is looking for communities in England impacted by slavery, might I recommend Rochdale, Telford, Blackpool, Oldham, Rotherham, and many similar towns across the country where young English girls have been abused by Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. I don't think the Church is interested in addressing modern-day slavery, though. Instead, it chooses to virtue signal over a rather horrific period of our history that is well and truly over. We have repented as a nation. Our government has apologised. Our monarch has expressed sorrow. It's time to move on. If we truly are a Christian nation that we profess to be, the step following repentance is forgiveness. It's sad to see the Church fall into the trap of victimhood. The Church is right to want to engage in these conversations, but I think it's doing so in a destructive and counterproductive manner. Instead, wouldn't it be more fitting for the Church to remind itself and the nation that the Christian abolitionists initiated and organised the abolition movement? It is Christians who perpetrated the end of the transatlantic slave trade. William Wilberforce was motivated by a desire to put Christian principles into action and to serve God in public life. In his diary, Wilberforce wrote, "God Almighty has set before me two great objects, the suppression of the slave trade and reformation of morals." How sound. If you ask me, the Church of England is splashing out £100 million on its latest virtue signalling project, whilst neglecting its core role. The number of bums on pews is rapidly declining, and Christianity is in a minority faith in England for the first time. I suppose all this comes down to priorities. Gone are the days when theologians and pastors led the church. Now we're in a time of bureaucrats and managerial types. From my view, it seems the upper echelons of the Church of England are overseeing a managed decline, and their priority is to leave behind a perfectly embalmed liberal corpse. This week, the Church of England announced the creation of a £100 million fund to address past wrongs of slavery. The decision comes after a report last year found that some of the Church's wealth came from historic investment in the slave trade. However, clergy and parishioners have criticised the Archbishop of Canterbury for suddenly finding £100 million behind the sofa, at a time especially when churches are closing and vicars are losing their jobs and parishes are being merged. Joining me now is historian and broadcaster Dr. David Starkey. Welcome to the show again, Dr. David Starkey. Could you, well, first of all, have you read the Commissioner's report before I ask you what you think of it?
Yes, I have. I skimmed it. I've rarely seen a worse argued, and even more interestingly, Calvin, worse presented document. It's as though they try to present this as a serious piece of accounting. In other words, we've gone through the books and we can say this much of our wealth comes from slavery. There's even a great section by one of the big four chartered accountants, by Grant Thornton. But then you look at it, and you know what? It's very difficult to read it. Footnotes seem to be misplaced. The actual relationship of the evidence to the argument, these two columns, it sort of gets out of sync. And you suddenly realise that this isn't just virtue signalling, Calvin, it's something even more interesting. It's fact signalling. There's a pretense here of pinning it all down. Now, can we just do a quick sketch why the issue has arisen? The foundation of the wealth of the church commissioners, which is the basis on which the church still funds so much of its activities alongside congregational donations, was laid by Queen Anne, one of the most, you were talking about morality, one of the most consciously moral monarchs in British history, a devoted high church Christian at the beginning of the 18th century. She deliberately gives away what was left of the wealth that Henry VIII seized from the church. She gives it back to the church. And what they try to do is to invest it as sensibly as they could. So they invested in this new government. It's very much like Gordon Brown. It's a PFI. It's called the South Sea Company, which was an attempt at getting the huge debt that's being accumulated by the wars against France off the government's books. So you sort of slither it into this company, which, well, sort of does a bit of slave trading. By the way, they hugely exaggerate. It exports 38,000 slaves in the early 18th century. Now, that sounds an awful lot, Calvin. We exported 3.5 million. So it's a tiny, tiny proportion. Most of the money of the South Sea bubble is stock market and government stock trading. That's what it was there for. But you see, I've got a much bigger question to ask the church and to ask you. Why does this super pious queen, at a time when there's a conscious moral revival going in, why does she let the money, as it will be, eventually be invested? But she dies, but the money is, as it were, consciously ring-fenced as a moral gesture. Why is it put into the slave trade? Do you know what? Because nobody, Calvin, I'm sorry, actually thought it was wrong. The church did not think that it was wrong. Everybody thinks that people like Queen Anne and Edward Colston were somehow hypocrites, because, of course, they're not. Nowhere in the Bible is there any condemnation of slavery. Is there, Calvin?
Well, there is. There is an implicit condemnation, absolutely. When
No,
there is, because in those days, slavery was common, but Christ said that actually everyone is equal, and the slave is not lesser than the master. That's very much implicit. However,
you need to learn your Bible. Shush! You need to learn your seriously.
However,
you need to learn your Bible better. It's Paul in the Epistle to the Galatians or Galatians in chapter 3, verse 28. Yeah. There is neither Jew nor Greek. Please, but Calvin, please, this is important. I'm not teasing. Right. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither, in other words, there's neither slave nor free. There is neither man nor woman or male nor female, for we are all one in Christ. Now, they're not, Jesus isn't saying, and Paul isn't saying, let's abolish gender. He's not saying, let's abolish Jew and Greek. He's saying that in the mystery of Christ, these earthly things are abolished. This is not a campaign to abolish them. On the contrary, St. Paul explicitly says that masters should be obeyed by their slaves. This is why, you see, rather than saying there's something implicit in the Bible, you should recognize that for whatever number of thousands of years, 1800 years, hardly anybody thinks slavery is wrong. Hardly any Christian thinks slavery is wrong. Now, in other words,
I did address that point. It was the cultural norm of the time, absolutely, but there is certainly an implicit argument against slavery. But that passage you quoted right there is an egalitarian. That passage you quoted is an egalitarian passage, which means our identity shouldn't be rooted in our immutable characteristics. It should be invested in Christ, which is what unifies us all.
It doesn't mean that. It means that earthly identity is subsumed into the identity of Christ in another world.
And that's what that other world is the kingdom come that Christ brought about.
Shall we just park this?
Okay, we'll part it because you're wrong and you're not often wrong, so I'll let it slide. But you've mentioned the South Sea Company, and I want to know what the report says about it in contrast to what you've said about the South Sea Company.
Well, look at what it says. I mean, quite simply, it says that there is a very large measure of the investment of the South Sea Company that derived from the slave trade. But what I'm trying to explain to you is nobody thought they were doing wrong. Nobody was being... No, just please.
No, I agree with you, but I'm trying to move the conversation on, David. Because compare it to today, where the Church of England invests in... Church of England today invests in lots of companies on the stock market, for example, and has been caught out virtue signaling against certain companies whilst also investing in them. So the argument today is very different to what it was with the South Sea Company. You're quite right in that it was a social norm, so it wasn't seen as wrong. But today we're seeing the church invest in, for example, oil companies while speaking out against oil companies when they do think it's wrong. So actually, the hypocrisy is quite evident, is what I'm trying to say.
Yes, that's fine. But that doesn't tackle the big question. The big question, which I'm trying to get you to understand, is that what you put up Wilberforce there. I could also cite alongside Wilberforce from the Church of England. I could cite members of the Society of Friends, the Quakers. I could cite Dr. Johnson with his wonderful remark that nobody yelps more loudly in favour of liberty than a Yankee slave driver, that extraordinary paradox. What we've got to understand, Calvin, and this is what we should be talking about now, rather than arguing over each other. We should be admitting, you should be admitting, there is a great moral revolution at the end of the 18th century. It takes place only in one place. It takes place in Britain. And although people like Wilberforce and the Quakers phrase it in terms of religion, they cannot actually introduce or adduce any single biblical text in support of what they're saying. In other words, the notion of fundamental human equality does not come from Christianity. It comes from English common law. It comes from the political traditions of England. This is why when England first, as you were telling us rightly, when England has this unique, everybody had slavery. The unique distinction of England is that it abolishes slavery. When England abolishes slavery, it finds no support whatever in the rest of the world. The English, at the Congress of Vienna, after their great triumph in the wars against Napoleon, it tries to persuade all the European powers to join in the abolition of slavery. Not one of them will. And then you have this extraordinary fact in the early 19th century that hard-nosed politicians, brutal realists like Lord Palmerston, the greatest of our foreign secretaries, regards his, in other words, setting aside idealists like Wilberforce, hard-nosed politicians, a man like Palmerston regards his greatest triumph as being using the weight and the force and the power of the British Navy to destroy the slave trade. Now, that's what the Church of England should be talking about. It should be asking how it could bring about, share in a moral revolution of the 20th century. And instead, as you say, it just does the thing that surely the Church should never do. It just adopts the moral values of the time, whinging about black slavery without thinking at all.
We have to move on. We spent far too much time arguing about the reason, but we agreed that actually England was instrumental in ending slavery on a global scale. scale, and that's what we should have gotten to. But thank you anyway to historian and broadcaster Dr. David Starkey. Thank you for your time today. Interestingly, we tried to get someone on to defend this policy. We couldn't get anyone from the Church of England, from the Commission, from the Anti-Racism Task Force, or from the Bishop's College, interestingly. I wanted to get your views on it. So on the topics we've talked about today, especially the story that I broke on Twitter, I asked the question, the Church of England has committed £100 million in reparations for, quote, communities impacted by slavery. Should the C of E pay for, quote, historic links to transatlantic chattel slavery? Lots of you have tweeted your thoughts. Let's start with Luke. Luke says, the Church of England has committed £100 million in reparations. If the Church really does have that amount of money, then they should share the wealth with local dioceses. My local vicar manages 5 churches and she is only paid a half salary because that's what the diocese can afford. Luke hits the nail on the head there. The parochial system is fundamental in the Church of England. It means that everyone in the country has a priest, everyone belongs to a parish and has a priest praying for them at all times, whether they turn up to church or not. And right now we have too many priests who are in charge of 15, 16 parishes all at once. It's too many churches to manage. It's unrealistic, unsustainable. So the Commission could be putting money to that. Angel says, maybe pay to the family, descendants of the 2,000 British Royal Navy West Africa Squadron sailors who died preventing the slavers' ships from sailing and captured their ships and freed the slaves. Angel, I don't believe in reparations, but I'm with you. If we're going to pay reparations to someone, it should be the people that actually lost their lives to end slavery all around the world. Absolutely fantastic. Zelix goes on to say, they need to be very careful with how they toe this line. I can understand that they want to demonstrate accountability, but I'm not convinced this solution is biblical. I need to see what this package truly entails. And Zelix, you're right too, in that the Church needs to make sure that whatever it's doing is rooted in Scripture, and that needs to be at the forefront of what they're doing, rather than moral values of the day. David says, the church I attend has decided to stop paying its parish share. The PCC is outraged. There is no authority to pay money to a generation who are not victims of slavery. Parishioners will stop donating money when they find out this is how it's spent. For those who don't know, the parish share is what the parish church pays to the diocese. It's the big fund that all clumps together. So yeah, I think that's quite a sensible move. If you are going to continue paying money to your church, perhaps ask your church to stop sending money to the Church of England and keep it locally and fund local projects and local people who need it, rather than letting the Church of England splash it around on these vanity projects. I also had a poll up over the past couple of days asking that very same question. Should the C of E pay for historic links to transatlantic chattel slavery? 90% of you said no, 8% said yes, and only 1% said other. So thank you all so much for sending in your views and for voting in the poll and for replying in the comments. A spokesman for the Church Commissioners for England, who announced the establishment of the fund, said, "We recognise this investment comes at a time when there are significant financial challenges for many people and churches, and when the Church has commitments to address other wrongs from our past. We will continue to support these groups and remain committed to existing funding obligations." Plenty more to come this afternoon on my Common Sense Crusade after the break. Shortly before he died on Tuesday, Cardinal Pell wrote an article for The Spectator in which he denounced the Vatican's plans for its shortcoming synod on synodality as a toxic nightmare. I'll be asking, should more senior figures in the Church speak their minds and question authority? But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello again. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday, but looking ahead weather-wise, and it's going to remain cold. There'll be snow for some of us, but also quite a bit of winter sunshine to look forward to as well. The reason for the cold weather is this area of low pressure to the east of us. That's allowing for our winds to come from the north, so cold Arctic air plunging across the UK, which is why it's going to be so cold. Notice this weather system waiting out in the west. That's going to fringe south coastal parts as we go through Sunday night. Otherwise, for many through Sunday night, yes, there'll be some clear spells. Also, some showery rain, sleet or snow across some northern parts could lead to something of an ice risk here. And snow showers piling in from the north across parts of Scotland. These totals could build up as we go through the night. It is going to be be a cold night, even in the south, some places falling below freezing, could get as low as -10 in the sheltered parts of Scotland. The rain, sleet and snow across parts of the southeast could cause some problems early doors, but that will clear away as we go through the morning. Otherwise then, through Monday, for many it is going to be largely dry with lots of winter sunshine around. Yes, there'll be some showers towards the east and also plenty of showers towards parts of Scotland, and here they are readily going to be falling as snow. But for many, largely dry with sunny spells. Despite that though, it's cold, colder than today for most places, generally staying in mid-single figures Celsius. Little change for many as we go through Monday evening, and so most places staying largely clear, but continue to see snow showers across parts of Scotland, and then some showery rain, sleet and snow starting to push in from the southwest as we go through the night. Need to keep an eye on this because there could be some significant snow across some southwestern parts as we go through the early hours of Tuesday. It is going to be a colder night than this coming night for many, could even get as low as -11 or -12 perhaps in the sheltered glens of Scotland. Through Tuesday then, a cold, frosty, icy start for many of us first thing. Watch out for this showery rain, sleet and snow across southern parts. A little bit of uncertainty regarding how much snow we're going to see, but it is worth keeping up to date with that. There'll be further wintry weather as we go through the rest of the week, perhaps drier on Thursday, but staying cold. Bye-bye for now. See you later.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. In what is believed to be the last public statement before his unexpected death this week, Australia's most senior Catholic cleric wrote a scathing criticism of the Church's synod on synodality. The article was published in The Spectator, where Cardinal Pell, who described the synod as a toxic nightmare, which did not have the adequate concern for Catholic orthodoxy. In addition, a Vatican journalist has claimed Pell was the anonymous author of a memo made public in March, which was very critical of the pontificate of Pope Francis. Now, joining me to discuss these stories is Damien Thompson, who is Associate Editor at The Spectator. First of all, it was great to see this article come out in The Spectator. Can you tell us a little bit, Damien, about how it came to be and how Cardinal Pell wrote his last public piece with you guys?
Yeah, the article for The Spectator is dynamite. It's a bombshell. In it, the Cardinal, under his own name, talks about these plans for a synod on synodality, ludicrous concept that basically is an instrument by which an ultra-liberal faction in the Church is manipulating the Pope, or the Pope is allowing them to manipulate him. Pell, I know from my long conversations with him, has been deeply disturbed by this process of the synod on synodality. In this country, just 8% of practicing Catholics, that's 8% of 350,000 Catholics, which is all the number that go to Mass these days, responded to it. And so Pell wrote, by an enormous margin, regularly worshipping Catholics everywhere don't endorse the present synod findings, neither is there much enthusiasm at senior church levels. Continued meetings of this sort deepen divisions, and a knowing few can exploit the muddle and goodwill. Listen to this. The ex-Anglicans among us are right to identify the deepening confusion, the attack on traditional morals, and the insertion into the dialogue of neo-Marxist jargon about exclusion, alienation, identity, marginalization, you know the sort of thing, the voiceless, LGBT, as well as the displacement of Christian notions of forgiveness, sin, sacrifice, healing, redemption. Why the silence on the afterlife of reward or punishment, on the four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell? So these are extremely fundamental criticisms of the Synod document. However, even more of a bombshell than that was the revelation, which appeared, like this article, the day after Cardinal Pell died. And he was a friend of mine. I mean, not a close friend, but he was a friend of many people. But what a terrible, terrible loss. How much we'll miss him. Anyway, it was revealed by the Vatican journalist Sandra Magister that Cardinal Pell was, in fact, the author of the so-called Demos memo, which was published some time ago, I think in March last year, which is a memo written by an anonymous cardinal, whom we now know to have been Cardinal George Pell, in which he describes the current catastrophic state of the Catholic Church. And the best thing I can possibly do is just tell you what's in it, because most people don't know what's in it.
Can you sum it up in 30 seconds? Can you sum it up real fast?
Very quickly run through some of these points, because they're so important. Okay, he starts out by saying, the successor of St. Peter is the rock on which the Church is built. Okay, Calvin, did you hear that one? But then he quickly moves on to say, the German Synod speaks on homosexuality, women priests, communion for the divorced. The Pope is silent. Cardinal Hollerich, who's in charge of the thing, rejects the Christian teaching on Christian sexuality. The papacy is silent. This is doubly significant.
We're out of time, but where can people find the full thing?
Heretical. He does not use code or hints. If the Cardinal were to continue without Roman correction, this would present another...
Thank you. Sorry, Damien, we've got to go. But people can read more on The Spectator. You've got a wonderful article about it, and Cardinal Pell's got an article up there too. Thank you so much. That is Damien Thompson, Associate Editor at The Spectator. You are with GB News, on your TV, online and on your wireless. After the break, we'll be discussing whether Harry and Meghan will be invited to the King's coronation this May. Some royal insiders believe there's a chance of peace talks. But both sides may need to hold their hands up and admit they got it wrong. Now it's time for a check on news headlines with Ray Addison.
3:33, here's the latest. A 7-year-old girl remains in a stable but life-threatening condition after a drive-by shooting in North London yesterday. Police have urged witnesses to come forward after 6 people were shot outside a funeral in Euston. 4 women and a 12-year-old girl also required hospital treatment, with one of them suffering life-changing injuries. Superintendent Jack Rowlands says the suspects used a shotgun.
We believe the suspects discharged a shotgun from a moving vehicle, which was a black Toyota CHR. We want to hear from anyone who witnessed the incident or has information about it.
68 people have died following a plane crash in Nepal, the country's worst aviation disaster in 30 years. 72 people were on board the Yeti Airlines flight, which crashed in Pokhara during clear skies. Those on board included passengers from India, Ireland, Australia and France. The search for the remaining 4 passengers has been halted due to darkness until tomorrow morning. The Health Secretary has criticised the GMB union over what he calls a lack of patient and public safety during recent ambulance strikes. Steve Barclay writing to the union saying voluntary arrangements which were put in place were not enough. It comes as anti-strike legislation is due to be debated by MPs tomorrow. Last week, the GMB published an open letter saying ambulance staff felt demonised by the government. On TV, online and on DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Father Calvin will be back.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online, this is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. A royal source has reportedly said that peace talks between Prince Harry and the royal family will take place before the coronation. The source told The Times, "It's going to take flexibility on all sides, but it can be done. It's fixable." But can this really be accomplished before May the 6th? To give his thoughts on this story is royal commentator and broadcaster Rafe Hadel-Manku. Rafe, how are you today?
Always well, pleasure to be on again, Calvin.
Thank you, it's a pleasure to have you here. Do you think these peace talks can be achieved in a few months that we have before the coronation? What hurdles do they have to overcome?
Well, it all seems very rushed, doesn't it? I mean, the Times is reporting this senior source from the palace who has the ear of the king saying that they want the king, Prince William and Prince Harry to have a reconciliation by April. which point the wives would be invited into discussions, Meghan and Kate, perhaps with Queen Camilla, who knows, so that they can all be happy families by May the 6th. I think that's a rather tall order. I mean, the first thing is, of course, how can Prince William and the King have any trust in Harry and Meghan, that they're sincere, first and foremost, and secondly, that they won't divulge these private discussions and mediation talks either in a TV interview or with the in another book. You can't go off and start on that sort of a basis. And then again, when Harry and Meghan live in an alternative reality where, you know, where black is white and up is down, with this completely distorted version of the truth, as we've seen from the falsehoods and the inaccuracies and the distortions of truth in their book, how can you even begin to actually engage in meaningful discussion with people who don't actually see reality in the way that you do? And also, of course, Harry is demanding as a prerequisite for these negotiations or reconciliations that the palace and that the royal family apologize not only to him, but also to his wife, to Meghan. And how can you, if you are the Prince and Princess of Wales, for example, how can you actually apologize and turn the other cheek when you know full well that you're not in the wrong? Now, you know, Prince William is all for putting country first, but this is really surely a limit, I would have said. And then another issue here really is that we've seen recently that Harry's got this messiah complex. He seems increasingly arrogant and self-righteous, which is a dangerous combination for a man of limited intellect and ability. And he somehow thinks he's on a mission to reform the media and, most importantly, to reform the monarchy. And in that sort of way, he's actually, I suppose, the epitome of woke, because he thinks he's enlightened and the royal family is unenlightened. And it's his job to open their eyes and teach them, even if they don't want to be taught, which I would say is the very definition of woke. But how can you have a meeting of minds on an equal level when you're dealing with someone who's convinced that they're actually right?
Absolutely. It sounds like he doesn't want to compromise. In fact, it sounds like he wants to denigrate the role of not just Prince of Wales, but also the King, because this is obviously an issue with the future King that he has. And he wants him to effectively get down on his knee to him.
Yes, and you know what? I'm actually quite angry at this, because the King has been placed in this, this invidious position just 4 months before the coronation, when all attention, the whole nation should be focused on the monarchy, on the King setting out his new role, the Commonwealth realms being introduced to the King for the first time as their King because they don't know him so well. And at a time when we're supposed to be focusing on national unity and harmony and looking forward to this great ceremonial and constitutional event, the first time in 70 years, we instead have this, this nasty and destructive melodrama that's, sucking all of the attention away from what should be the most important event in 70 years. And then at the same time as all of this, just when the royal family think that Harry's fired his last, broadside against them, he now says, well, I actually held back the most explosive content from the book. Just wait and see. If I wanted to, I could publish a second, even more incendiary volume. Now, what is that if that's not a threat? It seems as if Harry's almost blackmailing the royal family. Engage with me, reconcile and apologize to me, or else.
Yeah, they have a book deal for 3 books, I believe, isn't it? And it doesn't have to be a biography for the next book. So it does seem a threat. I thought they were going to write something else, like a children's book. Do you think Harry's made himself a bit of a distraction here on purpose in the run-up to the coronation by publishing this book now?
Well, it's hard to see things otherwise. It's actually a 4-book deal, and we know that Meghan's been keeping a diary. So anyone who thinks that it's game over for all these revelations and scandal, they've got another thing coming. But what I should say, actually, is that Harry and Meghan were always hoping to have a reconciliation down the line. Why? Because they know that without the royal family, they're nothing. All of their wealth, all of their status, all of their relevance depends upon their association with the royal family. And
well, they need more content for the book, don't they?
Well, I said last year in the spring or in the summer, and it was reported elsewhere also, that Harry and Meghan's plan originally had to fulfill their obligations with Netflix and Random House publishers to get this money by putting out this documentary and this book, and then waiting a long time before approaching reconciliation. And as I said at the time, no one expected the Queen to die so early, and the anticipation had been maybe in later this year or 2024, 2025, when the Queen died, that would be the time to magnanimously have a reconciliation by the Sussexes. What better time than when a family is grieving for a family to come together and have reconciliation? But of course, things didn't turn out that way. And of course, as soon as the Queen died, as we know from reports, Harry was desperately trying to edit or delay publication of this book, knowing the damage that would be caused by it coming out when it did. But of course, he wasn't successful in that, and it has come out as it has. And that's why I think chances of a reconciliation are a far lot less likely now than they would have been had their original plan come to fruition.
I tend to agree with you. Thank you so much. That was the royal commentator and broadcaster, Rafe Hadel-Manku. Before we move on today, let's have a look at what you've had to say about today's topics. On slavery reparations, Terry says, this seems to be a classic Liberal tactic. Try to look good by their proposals and actions, but in reality, it's unfair. By giving reparations, it's actually giving to some, but not all. How is that Christian? Two wrongs don't make a right. Where I agree with you, Terry, is it's all about looking good. That's what virtue signalling is, because it's easier to look good than to actually do good. Mary adds to this by saying, I think an amends is a good thing, but it needs to be an amends, an actual attempt to mend. But throwing away money may not be the way. Also, where exactly is the money going to? To whom? Clarity on the amends details are crucial for true reparations in any scenario. Well, that's the question that I always ask when it comes to reparations. Who pays whom? And it seems in this case, the church is looking for communities harmed by transatlantic slavery. I don't think anyone alive today was harmed by slavery. Christian says, no one should have to pay for the sins of a forefather they never knew, period. Indeed. And we don't know who was involved, who wasn't involved, whose forefathers were and were not. It's a ridiculous situation to find ourselves in. But thank you for sending in your thoughts. The BBC has been criticised for giving jihadi birdie Shamima Begum her own 10-part podcast. The BBC says the series entitled I'm Not a Monster will give a full account of Begum's story and insists her story will not go unchallenged. However, critics say the broadcaster is wasting licence payers' money on giving a platform to someone who admits they joined a terrorist group. To give us his thoughts on this is social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Ihsan. Rakib, thank you for joining us today. Should we be worried that the BBC has decided to give a platform to a known terrorist?
I think we should be a little bit concerned, Calvin. I authored a piece for The Telegraph earlier in the week. In that piece, I said that the BBC risks becoming part of a wider cultural infrastructure, which is more interested in framing Shamima Begum as a victim, as opposed to a willing and committed ISIS volunteer. And I do feel that there's a broader discussion to be had in terms of the kinds of voices that we platform. Now, of course, I'm not saying that Shamima Begum shouldn't be platformed at all. Quite frankly, we've had multiple mainstream media outlets giving her airtime over the years. But I would like to see more voices belonging to groups which have been persecuted by ISIS being given the space to tell their story and for them to reveal the untold misery and suffering that they may have directly experienced or their loved ones have experienced at the hands of Islamist extremism.
What did you make of the actual podcast itself? I mean, I gave it a listen. I found it unnervingly sympathetic to Shamima. I could almost class the podcast itself as terrorist sympathising. It was quite one-sided in many aspects. You know, they talked about different ways of telling a story and what she groomed, and then they found out that actually she wasn't groomed. She set up a lot of this stuff herself. What was your take?
Well, I think that there's been a great deal of stripping Shamima Begum of personal agency, and I don't agree with that at all. And I don't think that's the kind of road that we should be going down. I think in terms of the material in the podcast itself, unfortunately, she comes across as rather inauthentic. And that's largely because in many of her interviews, she strikes contradictory positions. I think more generally, we have this growing progressive liberal bias in many of our public institutions, which see Muslims as an oppressed group. And that leaves individuals within those institutions vulnerable to pleas for sympathy from those who are associated with Islamist terror groups. And I think that that's a crying shame, when really I'd like to hear the voices of those who've actually suffered at the hands of Islamist extremism.
Yeah. Well, there's a difference between forgiveness and justice in Christianity as well. I think she should face justice and receive a just punishment. Do you agree? And what would a just punishment be in this situation?
Well, I think that there's been many debates about the citizenship stripping, the revocation of Shamima Begum's British citizenship, and I think that came across as more of a short-term fix. What I've suggested in the past is that we need to have a modernisation of our treason laws, Calvin. This modernisation reflects the ideological composition of the terror threat that we face as a country, and I do think there should be very severe penalties indeed for those who are found guilty of joining and being a member of a proscribed terrorist organisation. I think that would be a more sustainable, longer-term strategy. And I didn't necessarily agree with the government's efforts when Sajid Javid was Home Secretary in terms of trying to push Shamima Begum onto Bangladesh, who is an important member of the Commonwealth. So what you don't want to do when it comes to our sort of counter-terrorism policy, but also our citizenship regime, is alienate fellow members of the Commonwealth in the post-Brexit world.
With you, as always. Thank you, Dr. Rakib Ehsan, from the Social Policy Analyst. Speaking ahead of the release of the Shamima Begum podcast, BBC journalist Josh Baker said, "There are different ways to tell the Shamima Begum story. There's the one about a 15-year-old schoolgirl who was groomed and lured to a war zone by ISIS and now needs saving from a Syrian detention camp. And there's the one about a traitor who fled Britain to join ISIS and became known the world over as a terrorist and must be stopped from coming back to Britain." As Shamima Begum challenges the removal of her British citizenship by the UK government, I've examined her accounts to give listeners a definitive narrative on this complex, nuanced and shocking story. Early this week, writer James Delingpole wrote the following on Twitter: "Does anyone else learn Psalms for a hobby, or am I alone on this one?" The Psalms are an anthology of religious hymns in the Old Testament of the Bible, mostly written by King David, in which he expresses his faith in God and begs forgiveness for his sins. And James Delingpole joins me down the line now. Thank you for coming on a Sunday, James. Could you start off by telling us why you decided to post that tweet and the sort of responses you've had to it?
Well, I posted it because I do enjoy learning Psalms. It's my new hobby. I have in my head an anthology of English poetry, and now I've moved on to the Psalms, because the Psalms, the medieval monks used to work their way through the Psalter every day of their lives. And if you recite the Psalms in your head, not only do you get to know them much better, but also you fill yourself with the Holy Spirit. And get this, you ward off demons. I did a podcast once with a guy called Jerry Marzinski, he's in Arizona, and he treats paranoid schizophrenic patients. And he discovered that the best defense against the voices in their heads, which were wishing harm on them, was to teach them to recite the 23rd Psalm. That, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. That one. That's the kind of the classic psalm that protects you from evil. So psalms are great.
I'm with you on that. It's not just the monks that recite them and work their way through them every day. A lot of Anglicans still do. If the people stick by the Book of Common Prayer, morning and evening prayer, you read the Psalms every single day. It's a good way to get through them all in 1 month. What has your faith journey been like, James? Have you always been a Christian?
Well, I've always been a cultural Christian. So I remember going to confirmation classes at my boarding school and sitting through these rather dreary lectures from the chaplain. But I was mainly in it because you got an extra day out with your godparents, and you got sort of presents like maybe a gold St. Christopher necklace. So I was in it for all of the wrong reasons. And now then I moved on to the stage where I thought that being a Christian was part of our culture, a key part of our defense against the war on civilizations. Now I've come to be a proper believing Christian. I believe that we are approaching end times, let's say. I think the revelation is about to be fulfilled. And I think that we should all be turning to God because he's our salvation.
Absolutely with you. Could you give us a run through of one of your favourite psalms?
I think probably the easiest one is Psalm 23. I mean, everyone should learn that one first. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That's the King James version. I know it's not the Book of Common Prayer version. There's sort of subtle variations.
Still very sound. I like the Coverdale version though too, but thank you so much for that. That was writer James Delingpole, and you guys should be reading the Psalms too. It's very good. Each week on this show we like to end with a prayer actually, and today is the second Sunday in an ordinary time, or the second Sunday after Epiphany. So here's today's collect. Let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, who didst govern all things in heaven and earth, mercifully hear the supplications of thy people, and grant us thy peace all the days of our life. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, the Reverend Calvin Robinson. I'll be back with you next Sunday at 3 p.m. Sincere apologies for cutting the Damien Thompson story short. We will get him back, I promise you that. Nana Okoye is up next. Before that, here's your weather forecast. There's fault. Have a good week. God bless.
Hello again. I hope you're enjoying your Sunday, but looking ahead weather-wise, and it's going to remain cold. There'll be snow for some of us, but also quite a bit of winter sunshine to look forward to as well. The reason for the cold weather is this area of low pressure to the east of us. That's allowing for our winds to come from the north, so cold Arctic air plunging across the UK, which is why it's going to be so cold. Notice this weather system waiting out in the west. That's going to fringe south coastal parts as we go through Sunday night. Otherwise, for many through Sunday night, yes, there'll be some clear spells. Also, some showery rain, sleet or snow across some northern parts could lead to something of an ice risk here, and snow showers piling in from the north across parts of Scotland. These totals could build up as we go through the night. It is going to be a cold night, even in the south, some places falling below freezing, could get as low as -10 in the sheltered parts of Scotland. The rain, sleet and snow across parts of the southeast could cause some problems early doors, but that will clear away as we go through the morning. Otherwise then, through Monday, for many, it is going to be largely dry with lots of winter sunshine around. Yes, there'll be some showers towards the east and also plenty of showers towards parts of Scotland, and here they are readily going to be falling as snow. But for many, largely dry with sunny spells. Despite that though, it's cold, colder than today for most places, generally staying in mid-single figures Celsius. Little change for many as we go through Monday evening, and so most places staying largely clear, but continue to see snow showers across parts of Scotland, and then some showery rain, sleet and snow starting to push in from the southwest as we go through the night. Need to keep an eye on this because there could be some significant snow across some southwestern parts as we go through the early hours of Tuesday. It is going to be a colder night than this coming night for many, could even get as low as -11 or -12 perhaps in the sheltered glens of Scotland. Through Tuesday then, a cold, frosty, icy start for many of us first thing. Watch out for this showery rain, sleet and snow across southern parts. A little bit of uncertainty regarding how much snow we're going to see, but it is worth keeping up to date with that. There'll be further wintry weather as we go through the rest of the week, perhaps drier on Thursday, but staying cold. Bye-bye for now. See you later.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament.
But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.